Good morning. Bienvenue ici pour la conférence de presse sur un sujet tellement important. C'est mon honneur, c'est un honneur pour moi de prendre la parole and to serve as a moderator for today's press conference on the subject of stopping the RBC takeover of HSBC. I'm joined by a wonderful, stellar group of grassroots activists and NGOs and Indigenous leadership to present this press conference this morning on an issue that really is reaching across party lines. My name is Elizabeth May. I'm leader of the Green Party of Canada, member of Parliament for Saanich Gulf Islands. I really do appreciate the honor of being invited to moderate this press conference. Today we embark on a crucial mission, the Stop the RBC Takeover campaign. So we have a coalition of non-government organizations deeply concerned about the potential consequences of the RBC takeover of HSBC. This campaign addresses critical issues of affordability and competition, housing and Indigenous rights, and of course the pressing matter of the climate emergency. The campaign has already garnered significant attention, with key figures across party lines voicing their opposition to the takeover. The Finance Committee has also taken a stand, recommending that Ottawa block this acquisition. It is noteworthy that political parties across the spectrum, including Conservatives, New Democrats, Greens, et aussi le Bloc québécois, sont unifiés contre cette décision d'avoir un deal. We are against the deal of the takeover. Currently, the proposal is under the scrutiny of OSFI, the regulator, and it will reach Minister Freeland's desk for final decision after the scrutiny by OSFI. Today we have a lineup of distinguished speakers, so let me get this going right away with introducing Keldon Bester. Keldon is the Executive Director of CAMP and is a fellow at the Centre for International Governance Innovation. His extensive background includes roles as Special Advisor at the Competition Bureau and is a fellow at the Open Markets Institute. Over to you, Keldon.
Thank you so much. So in the current housing affordability crisis, Canadians need all the help they can get when it comes to making ends meet. Polling shows that from March to October of this year, the number of Canadians who consider their mortgage very difficult to pay is set to double, and we should expect that number to rise as more homeowners refinance in a higher interest rate environment. As an aggressive competitor, HSBC Canada represents the kind of competition that benefits Canadians by bringing down prices and offering choice, not just for HSBC customers, but for customers of the big banks as well when they go to refinance and look for some financial relief. At nearly 25% of the lending market, RBC is one of the largest lenders in the country and the largest player in the mortgage market. If RBC wants to grow, it should do so by competing aggressively for customers instead of buying up its competitors. Action on behalf of the government to block this takeover is needed because Canadians cannot count on weak competition laws they themselves are proposing comprehensive reforms to protect us in the banking sector. Industry watchers correctly called the Competition Bureau's decision not to intervene in the transaction a dark day in mortgage competition, even though the Competition Bureau admitted it would reduce rivalry in the mortgage market. Canadians should not bear the cost of laws that allow the largest financial institution in this country to buy up its competitors. Thankfully, it is within the Deputy Minister's power to take a broader public interest view of the transaction and block the proposed takeover to preserve housing affordability. The last thing Canadians need now is less competition for one of the most important financial decisions of their lives. The Deputy Prime Minister has a unique opportunity to act in the interest of Canadians, and we urge her to take it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keldon. Keldon, of course, is with the Canadian Anti-Monopoly Project. Our next speaker will be Julie Segal, Senior Manager of Climate Finance at Environmental Defence. Over to you, Julie.
Thank you, MP May. So I'd like to start by saying that climate experts would be deeply concerned if this merger were to go through, particularly without any climate conditions on the proposed purchase. If the federal government wants to keep its promises to Canadians of climate action, it has to regulate the financial sector in a way that aligns with the Paris Agreement and the Canadian government's commitments under it. With this proposed deal, RBC would be growing its business in a direction that would, frankly, entrench Canada's financial institutions in a direction that is not aligned with our climate agreement commitments. So a very important piece of this puzzle is that the Royal Bank of Canada is recognized as one of the worst banks globally when it comes to climate action. They are the largest global financier in fossil fuels, which of course are the leading cause of the climate crisis, which is making life harder for Canadians across the country and harming the communities and places that we love. On the contrary, HSBC has taken climate action much more so than the Royal Bank of Canada. While RBC has a ratio of funding fossil fuels versus clean energy that's one of the lowest of any banks globally of 0.4%, HSBC has a much more positive funding of clean energy versus fossil fuels of 0.9. If essentially RBC has committed to achieving net zero, RBC has made climate commitments, but does not have a credible climate plan. On the contrary, HSBC Global has a climate plan, but RBC would squash that progress in Canada if this merger were permitted to go through. Important to recognize why climate-related factors are important for financial sector considerations, like any proposed merger of banks. Financial risk in Canada is heightened by climate change. Over $100 billion of Canadians' assets are at risk of losing their value if our financial institutions like RBC continue to move too slowly on climate action. This is a matter of competitiveness, not just about competition, but ensuring that the Canadian economy is able to succeed in the green transition. We have to make sure that our financial institutions are aligned with climate action. This is important to consumers who are increasingly wanting their investments to align with sustainable choices, and allowing this merger to go through without climate conditions would limit sustainable options for investors who want their finances to align with their values. This is also a missing piece of Canada's climate plan. Aligning our financial sector is key if Canada wants to succeed on its climate commitments. And what we therefore recommend, we see this as an opportunity to build on the government's announcements in the Fall Economic Statement for a Sustainable Financial System, and to ensure that climate considerations are at the center of this deal. The government has an opportunity and should be ensuring that RBC either meets or exceeds HSBC's commitments on climate action, including HSBC's commitment in 2021 to rule out new fossil fuel expansion and their commitments under the Powering Past Coal Alliance. And should be ensuring that RBC develops a credible climate plan and that the best interests of Canadians are put forward on climate action. Thank you.
Thanks to Julie. C'est clair que le bilan de RBC en sujet de changement climatique est affreux. Mais également, RBC présente un bilan très inquiétant en matière de réconciliation avec les peuples autochtones. Turning to RBC's impact on Indigenous rights, we are shifting focus now and we'll go by video. I should say right away, of course, that we are here on the territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Ottawa is on Algonquin land, as in Parliament Hill. We're turning by video to Wet'suwet'en land defender. The Wet'suwet'en people have taken such a brave stance on project after project through their territories, disrespecting UNDRIP, and we turn now to Yves Saint by video with a statement from Wet'suwet'en territory. Okay, thank you.
Far from the truth. We should not let RBC to grow. because RBC is invested in projects like the Coastal GasLink pipeline, which have not gotten the proper free, prior, and informed consent of the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs, making this project illegal. Since 2019, we have experienced year after year militarized raids of up to 100 RCMP coming onto the territory, ripping Wet'suwet'en people off their lands at gunpoint. This is inexcusable and disgusting. This is RBC's investment. Me, as a Wet'suwet'en person, everywhere I go, every talk I go to, every event, rally I go to, I am met with a sniper on the roof. And this is RBC's investments and treatment of Indigenous people. Just like the AGM at RBC's AGM last April, where we have experienced segregation. We experienced segregation as one of our guests from the United States had said, her own words, because we were segregated, that this is some Jim Crow. And this is RBC's treatment of Wet'suwet'en people and Indigenous people. And, you know, we had security guards like accost us. One of our hereditary chiefs, he had hands put on his regalia, which is sacred. I had RCMP push me at the door, and one of our elders was grabbed by the arm. So this is at RBC's AGM. It's treatment of Indigenous people. So I'm calling on the Finance Minister of Canada, Chrystia Freeland, to not allow RBC to grow. This is what RBC is invested in, and its treatment in Indigenous people. So it should not be allowed to grow. Thank you.
Thank you, Gaila Kasla, and thank you so much to Yves Saint for sending us that message. Our last speaker is a distinguished international voice on housing. Leilani Farha has been the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to housing and is a global director of The Shift. She'll speak to us on the critical issues of homelessness and why concern for homelessness should lead us to oppose this biggest bank merger in Canadian history. Leilani.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Good morning. The Shift has joined this campaign because we're concerned that the impact of greater concentration of financial services and products in the value chain, particularly for tenants and homeowners. It is our position that Minister Freeland has legal obligations to review the merger for its consistency with human rights. It is not news to say that Canada is in the midst of a housing crisis. Home ownership is increasingly out of reach with high interest rates and unaffordable mortgages. Meanwhile, the cost of rental accommodation is skyrocketing. This merger is unlikely to make these conditions better and may make them worse. In the housing sector, the concentration of ownership of multifamily apartment buildings by a few real estate investment trusts is having a very negative impact. These actors are notorious for exploiting laws to raise rents and increase profitability. RBC is one of the country's top underwriters of equity and debt for these real estate investment trusts, and RBC is the top shareholder in many Canadian REITs. The expansion of RBC will simply be more of the same. This merger narrows the value base within the banking sector. This is a real loss. Let's remember, competition is important, not just for the downward trend on prices, but also because a diversity of values contributes to a fairer society. In line with this, Minister Freeland is required to assess whether the merger is in keeping with the provisions of Canada's National Housing Strategy Act, the aim of which is to correct for inequalities caused by housing policy. The Act requires that all policy decisions taken in relation to housing and real estate be consistent with human rights. Minister Freeland must assess whether this merger might result in any harm to tenants or current or future homeowners. Also, in keeping with Canada's commitment to the OECD guidelines on multinational corporations, Minister Freeland must ask RBC to engage in a human rights due diligence impact assessment prior to the merger. This would entail identifying and assessing adverse human rights and environmental impacts. Minister Freeland has indicated the government is determined to address the housing crisis. If that's the case, she cannot allow the most powerful financial actors in our country to gain more power without a rigorous assessment of their activities. She must ensure this merger does not go forward if it will contribute to or sustain the unaffordability of housing. Thank you.
I want to thank you all, distinguished speakers from different parts of civil society and Indigenous nations on this territory of Turtle Island that have made the compelling case, as many others have done and will continue to do until Minister Freeland rejects the takeover of RBC taking over HSBC. We've certainly never heard cries in the street and chants of more big banks. That's something we never hear, because increasing power for the largest funders of the climate emergency, funders and profiteers from injustice, are not the sectors of our society that we should be rewarding. Nous sommes disponibles maintenant pour les questions en anglais ou en français. S'il vous plaît, posez vos questions et indiquez pour le présenteur, les invités distingués que vous voulez répondre à vos questions. So please, if you have questions, we're available, any of us, to respond in English or French. We are extremely grateful for your attendance here this morning at this press conference, and we ask you to join us in the campaign to stop the RBC takeover. Merci.
If you are joining us on Zoom, please use the raise hand function now. Si vous êtes sur Zoom, utilisez la fonction lever la main. We don't have any questions.